She said I tried to kill her. That's the first thing she screamed when the police showed up. My neighbor, the same woman who'd been trespassing on my land for months, now stood in my cornfield next to her Escalade with 4 blown tires, claiming I had tried to murder her. What she didn't know was that everything she just said was being recorded. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of 6 months of warnings, trespassing, and arrogance. And the moment her car hit those spiked strips, the game she'd been playing finally turned real. But to understand how we got there, how a quiet farmer ended up in a full-blown war with the most powerful HOA in town, we need to go back to where it started. Back to the shortcut that changed everything. When I bought my property on the edge of Meadowbrook Estates, I thought I'd finally found peace. 10 acres of open land, rolling cornfields, a small red barn, and a horizon that stretched farther than the noise of any city could reach. No committees, no parking violations, no HOA, just me, my cattle, and quiet mornings with coffee on the porch. For the first few weeks, it was exactly that. Peaceful, simple, perfect, until the tire tracks appeared. They sliced across my cornfield like scars, deep, fresh, and careless. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck, or maybe some lost teenager trying to take a shortcut home. But when it happened again, same tracks, same route, this time flattening an entire row of young corn, I knew it wasn't random. I installed a trail camera. The next morning, I checked the footage, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a stranger. It was my neighbor, Victoria Peton. White Escalade, HOA emblem dangling from her rearview mirror. She wasn't lost. She was speeding, laughing, cutting straight through my property like she owned it. That was the moment peace turned into patience. The kind of patience you only have before a storm. The next afternoon, I walked over to her house to clear things up like adults. Victoria's mansion sat behind an ornate iron gate, the kind that screamed money first, manners later. I rang the bell. She came out dressed for a real estate showing, phone in hand, smile rehearsed. "Marcus, right?" she said brightly. "The one with the little farm at the corner?" "Yeah," I said. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I've seen tire tracks through my field. Looks like someone's been cutting through." "Oh, that," she said, waving a manicured hand like she was brushing away dust. "That's the easement road. Everyone in Meadowbrook uses it. It's community property." I frowned. "That's not what my deed says. There's no easement. It's private." Her smile stiffened, polite but icy. "Well, my husband is the HOA president, and he says otherwise. It's always been there, long before you moved in. I'd hate for this to become a disagreement." There it was, a threat wrapped in sugar. "Victoria," I said evenly, "there's no easement. I've got the legal papers to prove it. Please stop driving through." Her smile didn't falter, but the tone changed. "You'll find it's easier to go along with the community, Marcus. Trust me." Then she turned and walked back into her house without another word. That night, I heard the sound, the engine, the laughter, the horn. I ran outside, just in time to see her Escalade flying through my corn again, headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The next morning, 2 fence posts were snapped clean, and Daisy, one of my pregnant heifers, was pacing, terrified. By evening, she miscarried. That was the moment my patience broke. I called the sheriff. Deputy Morrison showed up, a tall man in his 50s with kind eyes and tired hands. I showed him the photos, the damage, and the trail cam footage. "She's trespassing," he said, rubbing his temple. "But HOA people can be complicated. I'll file a report and give her a warning. If it keeps happening, we'll take it further." It kept happening. Over the next month, she doubled down. Every week, I'd find new tire marks, new damage, and fresh arrogance. I'd replace the fence, and the next day, it'd be broken again. Then came the letter, HOA letterhead, signed by her husband, Richard Peton. "Mr. Chun, you are unlawfully obstructing a community easement and endangering residents. Failure to remove barriers will result in legal action and fines." They were bluffing, but it was the kind of bluff people like them used to scare you into submission. I wasn't scared, just done. So I started documenting everything. Photos, dates, certified mail, copies of my property deed. If they wanted to fight, I'd make sure it was fought on paper, not on emotion. After my fourth complaint, Deputy Morrison came by again. "You've got the right to protect your land," he said, "as long as it's within the law. If you're going to use deterrents, make sure they're properly marked and you've warned her." That was all I needed to hear. I installed professional-grade retractable spike strips, the same kind law enforcement uses. Legal, visible, effective. Then I posted new signs every 50 feet. Private property, vehicle deterrent devices in use. And just to make sure everything was by the book, I mailed Victoria one final certified letter with photos of the signs, dates of installation, and a note. "You are being formally warned. Do not trespass." She signed for it. I had the proof. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without worrying about headlights cutting across my land. The next morning, the silence shattered. 4 loud bangs, followed by a scream. I ran outside and saw the Escalade. Her Escalade, sitting in the middle of my field for tires shredded, rims digging into the dirt. Smoke rose from the hood like a ghost. Victoria stumbled out, furious, mascara streaking down her face. "You try to kill me," she screamed. "You set traps on public property." Before I could say a word, she was dialing 911. When Deputy Morrison arrived, she ran straight to him, full of fake tears. "Officer, thank God. He set spike traps. He tried to murder me." The deputy looked at her, then at the bright yellow warning signs, standing exactly where I'd placed them. "Mr. Chun," he said, "you mentioned those signs last week, right?" I nodded, handing him a folder. Property deed, warning letters, certified mail receipts. Everything documented. He flipped through it, nodded slowly, then turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, do you have proof of this alleged easement?" "My lawyer has everything," she snapped. "This is HOA land. Do you have any documents with you?" he pressed. Her confidence cracked. Not right now." "Then, ma'am," he said calmly, "I'm afraid you're trespassing." The color drained from her face. "You can't do this. My husband isn't the law," Morrison finished. "And threatening an officer isn't going to help you." As the tow truck winched her Escalade onto the flatbed, Victoria stood there silent for once. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because even then, I knew this wasn't over. People like Victoria don't accept consequences. They call lawyers. And as she drove away in the back of that deputy's cruiser, I had no idea just how far she'd go to make me pay for standing my ground. But one thing was certain. I had the truth. And the truth, documented and patient, always wins in the end. The morning it happened, I was fixing a fence post on the south side of the property when I heard it. A sound I'll never forget. First came the sharp hiss of air, then a heavy metallic thud, and finally, a woman's scream that carried across the fields like a siren. At first, I thought someone had crashed. I dropped my hammer, climbed onto the ATV, and sped toward the sound. Dust was hanging thick in the air, sunlight cutting through it in sharp, golden beams. And there she was, Victoria Peton, standing beside her white Escalade, hands on her hips, staring at 4 very flat, very shredded tires. Her face was red, not from embarrassment, but from pure rage. When she saw me, she pointed like I was a criminal caught in the act. "You did this," she screamed. "You vandalized my car." I stayed calm. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind a dozen times. "Good morning, Victoria," I said. "You're on private property again. I told you there were vehicle deterrents in place. You even signed for the warning letter." She took a step toward me, her heels sinking into the soft dirt. "You can't just destroy people's property. I'll have you arrested." I pulled out my phone, opened a photo folder, and showed her the images, the warning signs, the certified letter receipt, and the sheriff's written confirmation that I was within my rights. "I didn't destroy anything," I said evenly. "You did. You ignored the signs and the letters. You trespassed." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd realized the gravity of what she'd done. But then the switch flipped, entitlement replacing reason. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed. "My husband's the HOA president. He knows the county commissioner personally. You're going to regret this." I almost laughed. "I'm sure he does. But this isn't HOA property. This is mine." She stormed back to her car, yanked open the door, and sat there fuming while she dialed her phone. I didn't need to guess who she was calling. 10 minutes later, a black pickup pulled up. Richard Peton, the HOA president himself. Square jaw, perfectly pressed golf shirt. The kind of man who thought leadership meant speaking louder than everyone else. He climbed out, took one look at the Escalade, and turned to me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus, right?" he said, extending his hand like this was some kind of business meeting. I didn't shake it. "You might want to park that a few feet back. The spikes are still active." His eyes flicked toward the ground, then back to me. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said. "I think this is trespassing." He let out a long sigh. One of those theatrical, I'm dealing with an unreasonable person sighs. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I get it," he said. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work. This road has been used by residents for years. It's an access route. Has been since before you bought this land. Show me the documentation," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me. Show me the recorded easement. The one that gives you the right to drive through my field." He hesitated, just for a second. Then his confidence returned. "We'll have the HOA lawyer send you something." "Great," I said. "Until then, stay off my property." That was the first time I saw Richard lose control. His face hardened, and his voice dropped into that cold, clipped tone used by men who aren't used to being told no. "You've made a serious mistake, Marcus. The HOA will not tolerate this kind of harassment." I wanted to tell him the irony of his statement, how I was the one being harassed, my land being used without permission, but I could already see the storm forming behind his eyes. No amount of reasoning would break through that wall of arrogance. So I didn't argue. I just pulled out my phone, pressed record, and said clearly, "You're currently trespassing on my property. You've been asked to leave. This interaction is being documented." That got his attention. He stepped back, his expression tightening. Then, without another word, he motioned to Victoria to get into his truck. They left the Escalade sitting there, tires destroyed, rims scraping dirt. As they drove off, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. Not vengeance, not satisfaction, just control. I called the sheriff's office to file an incident report. Deputy Morrison arrived about an hour later. He examined the spike system, read the signs, and nodded slowly. "You warned them plenty," he said. She knew exactly what she was doing. He took photos, wrote his notes, and said he'd reach out to the Petons about recovering their vehicle at their own expense. Before he left, I asked him, "Can they really do anything to me for this?" He shook his head. "Legally? No. But knowing folks like them, they'll try. Expect some letters." He was right. 3 days later, I got one, thick, embossed with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA logo. Inside was a formal complaint accusing me of endangering residents, causing property damage, and interfering with a community access road. I almost laughed reading it. The sheer audacity of that statement was something else. I sent a copy straight to my attorney, who fired back with a cease and desist letter citing the actual law. A week later, I got a response, this time from their attorney, claiming the HOA will be filing for a prescriptive easement, a fancy way of saying we've used your land long enough, so now it's ours. That's when things shifted from annoying to serious. I'd heard of HOAs trying to bully residents within their neighborhoods, but I never imagined one trying to strong-arm a non-member landowner outside their boundaries. Still, I wasn't panicked. I had documentation, photos, video, county maps, legal proof that no such easement had ever existed. But as I'd soon find out, reason and proof don't mean much when you're dealing with people who believe rules don't apply to them. The first real retaliation came quietly. My mailbox was knocked over. Not once, but 3 times in 2 weeks. Then someone spray-painted "selfish" on the edge of my fence. Coincidence? Maybe. But I'd lived long enough to know when something wasn't random. One night, around 11 p.m., I saw headlights approaching down the old access road again. My heart sank, but this time it wasn't a car cutting through. It was a group of people on foot, flashlights bobbing in the dark. I grabbed my own light and stepped out onto the porch. "Can I help you?" I called out. A woman's voice answered. "We're with the HOA. We're surveying the easement." I almost laughed. On private land? At night? They didn't respond, just muttered among themselves and left. By that point, I was starting to understand something fundamental. This wasn't about land or access. It was about control. The Petons weren't used to losing, and now that someone had stood up to them, they were determined to make an example out of me. I reinforced my gate with steel posts, installed more cameras, even set up motion sensors that pinged my phone if anyone came within 100 feet of the perimeter. For a while, things quieted down again. Then, one morning, I got a letter, not from the HOA this time, but from the county zoning department. It said there was a pending complaint against me for unauthorized use of deterrent devices and obstruction of a public access path. In other words, the HOA had gone to the county, and that's when I realized this was only the beginning. The envelope came on a Tuesday morning, thick enough to make a sound when it hit the porch. At first glance, it looked official. County seal in the corner, return address from the Department of Planning and Zoning. My stomach tightened. I knew before I opened it that this had the Petons' fingerprints all over it. Inside were 3 pages of legal jargon and one accusation after another. Unauthorized installation of hazardous deterrent devices. Obstruction of a public right-of-way. Failure to obtain proper permitting for access modification. They'd gone all in. Every accusation designed to sound legitimate. Every word meant to make me look like some backwoods vigilante who'd turned his driveway into a death trap. For a few seconds, I just stood there on the porch, reading the letter over and over. The calm satisfaction I'd felt after Victoria's little tire-shredding stunt evaporated like dew in the sun. This wasn't about trespassing anymore. This was about power. I called the number listed on the letter and got transferred to a zoning officer named Angela Ramos. Her voice was polite but firm, the kind that had handled more than her share of angry landowners. "Yes, Mr. Chun," she said, typing in the background. "We did receive a complaint from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. It claims you're blocking an established access road." "Ma'am, there's no access road," I said. "I've got the deed, the plat map, and a written statement from the county clerk confirming there's no easement." She paused. "If that's true, then this investigation will clear you. But we still have to come out and inspect the property. Standard procedure." When? Friday morning. I thanked her and hung up, then spent the next 2 days combing through every document I had. The original purchase contract, the title insurance, aerial photos, county GIS maps. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The Petons were bluffing. But I'd seen enough bureaucracy to know that truth and paperwork don't always move at the same speed. Friday came bright and early. Angela pulled up in a county SUV with the logo stenciled on the side. She was in her 40s, neatly dressed, clipboard in hand, and she carried the quiet professionalism of someone who wasn't easy to intimidate. I met her by the gate, where my private property signs stood tall and gleaming. "Morning, Mr. Chun," she said. "Mind showing me where the alleged road is?" "Sure," I said, leading her along the worn tire path that had been carved by months of trespassing. The soil was dry, scattered with bits of shredded rubber from Victoria's last visit. Angela walked slowly, taking pictures with her tablet, jotting notes. When we reached the spot where the spike system was installed, she crouched down, examining it. "You installed this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. It's retractable. Only deploys when I'm not expecting guests or deliveries. And as you can see," I pointed to the sign above it, clearly marked. She nodded. "Looks properly maintained. You said law enforcement approved this?" "Deputy Morrison. He documented everything." "Good." She straightened up. "Honestly, Mr. Chun, from what I'm seeing, this looks like private property, not a public easement. But we'll verify with the recorder's office." As we headed back to the gate, another car pulled up, and my stomach sank. A silver Lexus, HOA license plate frame, and in the driver's seat, none other than Richard Peton himself. He climbed out, smiling like a man arriving to close a deal. "Morning, Angela," he said, his tone dripping with familiarity. "Glad you could come out. We've been very concerned about the community's access." Angela looked puzzled. "Community's access to what, exactly?" "Our jogging trail," Richard said smoothly. "It cuts through here. Been used for decades. The new owners blocked it off and installed danger spikes. Several residents are upset." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "There's no jogging trail. Never has been. This is my land, my driveway. Angela glanced between us. Mr. Peton, do you have any documentation of that trail? He smiled, but his eyes flickered, just a fraction. It's informal. Historical, you might say. Everyone knows it's there. Angela's expression didn't change. Without recorded documentation, it's not recognized as public access. If it's unrecorded, it's private. For the first time, Richard's smile slipped. We'll provide something soon, he said. Our attorney is preparing it. I could almost hear the lie crack in his voice. Angela closed her clipboard. Then until that's verified, I'm marking this as private property. No code violations observed. Richard's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. No, she said calmly. I'm following the law. She shook my hand, thanked me for my cooperation, and left. Richard lingered, glaring at me across the fence. You think this is over? He said quietly. It's not. You're going to wish you'd worked with us. Then he drove off. For a while, I thought that might be the end of it. The county cleared me, Morrison backed me up, and I figured even the Petons had limits. But people like that don't stop when they lose, they escalate. The next week, I noticed something strange. Trucks from the county road department parked near the Meadowbrook entrance, workers digging, measuring. I asked him what was going on. New access project, he said. HOA requested an extension connecting to your property line. My stomach dropped. They were trying to build a road, a literal physical path that would force a connection to my land. I called Angela immediately. She sounded frustrated. They submitted a request, yes, but it's being reviewed. They're arguing that historical usage qualifies it as an access point. We're not approving anything until legal verifies ownership. I thanked her, but deep down I knew this wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was about leverage. They were trying to wear me down until I either gave up or sold the land. And that's when I decided to stop playing defense. That night, I met with my attorney, Sarah Whitaker, a no-nonsense woman who'd handled property disputes for 20 years. She listened quietly while I explained everything, from the trespassing to the tires to the new road scheme. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. They're bluffing, she said, but they're dangerous bluffs. The goal isn't to win. It's to drain you. They'll bury you in paperwork, force you to respond to every letter, hoping you'll cave. So how do I stop them? I asked. She smiled faintly. You hit back legally. We'll file for a civil injunction to prevent any construction or access attempts. We'll also pursue damages for trespassing and vandalism. That should get their attention. It was the first real plan that felt like it might end this nightmare. 2 weeks later, Sarah filed the injunction. The HOA received notice through the court, and within 48 hours, the phone call started, first from Richard, then from their attorney, demanding a meeting to resolve things amicably. I agreed, not because I trusted them, but because I wanted to see their faces when they realized they'd lost control. The meeting took place at the county mediation office. The Petons arrived together, dressed like they were heading to a golf tournament instead of a legal dispute. Their lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit, opened with practiced charm. Mr. Chun, the HOA values cooperation, he began. We believe this entire situation is a misunderstanding. My clients simply seek reasonable access. Access to what? I asked. To the community trail network. I looked straight at him. There is no trail network. You want a shortcut, and you're not getting it. Richard's face flushed. You can't block residents from. I can. I interrupted, and I have. The county confirmed it's private. You've trespassed, damaged property, and harassed me. The next time it happens, we'll be in civil court for damages. The room went silent. The lawyer shifted in his seat. Victoria's jaw clenched so tight, I thought she might crack a tooth. Finally, the lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps it's best if both parties refrain from further action until the court's decision. I nodded. Agreed. When we walked out of that room, I thought, maybe, just maybe, the storm was passing. But as I would learn soon enough, the Petons didn't like to lose in private. Their next move wouldn't come through lawyers or county offices. It would come through whispers, rumors, and a public smear campaign that would turn neighbors against me, one Facebook post at a time. And that's when the battle went from legal to personal. It started quietly, like a small brush fire you think you can stamp out with your boot. The first sign came from my neighbor Dale, the same guy who'd been friendly since I moved in. He stopped by one morning, hat in hand, looking uneasy. "Marcus," he said, "you seen what's going on in the Meadowbrook Facebook group?" I shook my head. "I stay off that circus." He sighed. "Might want to take a look. They're talking about you. A lot." Against my better judgment, I made a fake account and joined the group that night. It didn't take long to find the post. There was a long, dramatic rant from Victoria Peton herself. Police Garlight Community Warning. Police Garlight. A hostile landowner bordering Meadowbrook Estates has installed illegal tire spikes and blocked a public easement used by residents for decades. One of our members nearly died when her vehicle was sabotaged. We're working with county officials to protect our safety and restore our access rights. Please be cautious if walking near that property. He's dangerous. The post had over 200 comments, some sympathetic, some furious, a few asking questions. But the damage was already done. My name wasn't even mentioned, but everyone knew. The hostile landowner was me. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart thudding. They weren't just fighting me in court anymore. They were trying to destroy my reputation. By the next morning, I could feel the shift in town. The lady at the feed store didn't greet me like usual. A group of HOA residents at the diner went quiet when I walked in. Even the mailman seemed nervous dropping off my letters. And then came the flyers, glossy sheets slipped under doors and pinned to community boards. Protect Meadowbrook. Say no to violence and property obstruction. Each one included a blurry photo of my fence and a zoomed-in shot of the warning signs, making them look menacing and out of context. I'd seen smear tactics before, in politics and corporate disputes, but there was something particularly nasty about watching it unfold in your own backyard. That evening, Dale came by again. "They're saying you threatened her life," he said quietly. "Said she barely survived your trap." I rubbed my temples. Unbelievable. Morrison's report proves she was trespassing. She had multiple warnings. "Yeah, well," Dale said, "truth doesn't travel half as fast as gossip." He wasn't wrong. So I decided to go public on my own terms. The next morning, I set up my camera in the barn, the same one where I'd stored the spike strips. I wasn't planning to make a YouTube video back then. I just wanted my own record, something clear and factual in my own words. I spoke calmly. No anger, no theatrics. "My name is Marcus Chun. I own and maintain this property. For 6 months, I've dealt with repeated trespassing by certain HOA members who believe they have access rights that don't exist. After multiple warnings, I installed retractable vehicle deterrents, clearly marked, legally approved, and disclosed to law enforcement. Any claims that I endangered anyone's life are false. I have full documentation, including certified letters, photos, and police reports. Then I panned the camera over every sign, every fence post, every inch of evidence. It wasn't flashy, just the truth. I uploaded it to my small farming channel, where I usually posted about livestock and fencing tips. Within 24 hours, it had 8,000 views, mostly locals. By the end of the week, 20,000. People started commenting things like, "HOA overreach again. He's got receipts, they're lying." Classic entitlement. The narrative started to shift. Slowly but visibly. The Petons didn't like that. 2 days later, I got a letter from their attorney accusing me of defamation, online harassment, and endangerment of community safety. Sarah, my lawyer, laughed out loud when she read it. "They're panicking," she said. "They started this smear campaign, and now your video's making them look like fools. Don't delete it. Don't respond. Just keep documenting." That became my mantra, document everything. So when they sent another HOA newsletter claiming they were pursuing criminal charges, I saved it. When they sent out an email warning residents to avoid hostile contact with Mr. Chun, I saved that too. And when someone spray-painted murderer on my mailbox one night, I installed 2 more cameras and called Deputy Morrison. He arrived the next morning, grim-faced. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "I've seen this kind of escalation before. You're doing the right thing. Stay calm. Keep everything recorded." He reviewed the footage from the night before. The vandal's face was covered, but the vehicle wasn't. A white Range Rover registered to none other than Meadowbrook HOA treasurer, Victoria Peton. Morrison whistled under his breath. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. He filed a report, took photos, and promised to follow up. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was defending my dignity. The next HOA meeting was open to residents, so I decided to go. Dale tagged along for moral support. When I walked into that room, the chatter stopped. You could have heard a pin drop. Victoria sat at the front beside Richard, both wearing smug expressions that said they thought they owned the room. The HOA president, Richard, of course, cleared his throat. "Mr. Chun, this is a private community meeting." "I receive an invitation," I said, holding it up. "It was mailed to me, so here I am." He frowned but didn't object. I waited while they went through their usual motions: budget, landscaping, neighborhood watch. And then Victoria took the floor. "As many of you know," she began, projecting her voice like a stage actress, "our community has been dealing with a dangerous situation involving an aggressive property owner adjacent to Meadowbrook. We've pursued all proper channels, but we may need to take legal action for the safety of our residents." I stood. "You mean me?" She froze mid-sentence. "Excuse me. You're talking about me. The dangerous property owner. The one you've been defaming publicly for weeks." Gasps rippled through the room. I held up a folder, every printed Facebook post, every newsletter, every letter from their lawyer. "I have all of it documented," I said, my voice steady. "Every lie, every attempt to twist the truth. I've got police reports, certified mail receipts, and video evidence showing exactly who's been trespassing and vandalizing my property. And I'll be happy to share it all with the county, with the DA, and with anyone else who's tired of this HOA's abuse of power." The silence that followed was heavy, not the silence of shock, but of realization. One board member, a woman I later learned was Patricia Chun, no relation, finally spoke. "Victoria, is any of this true?" she asked. Victoria stammered, tried to deny it, but Patricia wasn't buying it. You could see doubt spreading through the room like cracks in glass. Richard banged his gavel. Meeting adjourned, but the damage was done. The next day, I started hearing rumors, not about me this time, but about them. Whispers that Patricia had begun digging into HOA finances. Questions about how funds were being used. Mentions of unauthorized expenses and missing receipts. It was subtle at first, but it spread fast. And just like that, the power dynamic flipped. For the first time in months, I felt the weight start to lift. The truth had momentum now, and it wasn't on their side. I didn't celebrate, not yet. People like Victoria didn't give up quietly. They doubled down until the very end. But as I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset burn orange over the cornfields, I finally allowed myself a small smile. They tried to ruin my name. They tried to scare me into silence. But now, they were the ones under scrutiny, and all I'd done was stand my ground, calmly, legally, and with every fact in my corner. The smear campaign had backfired, and deep down, I knew the real storm, the one that would end their reign of intimidation, was still coming. The calm after that HOA meeting didn't last long. It never does in these kinds of battles. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a call from Patricia Chun, the same board member who had spoken up that night. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I think you were right about more than just the trespassing." Her voice had that mix of anger and disbelief that people get when they realize they've been lied to. "What do you mean?" I asked. She took a breath. "I'm the HOA's financial secretary, technically. I just never had full access to the accounts. Richard and Victoria handle all the payments and reporting. But after last week's meeting, I went through the online ledger. There are transactions that make no sense. Landscaping payments that don't match any invoices, cash withdrawals that shouldn't exist, and thousands spent on community safety improvements." My eyebrows shot up. "Community safety? You mean the fence and the spike strips they keep accusing me of?" She sighed. "Exactly. It looks like they billed the HOA for materials that never went to community property. Marcus, they might have used HOA funds to try to fight you." That stopped me cold. It's one thing to deal with entitled neighbors. It's another to realize they're siphoning money from their own community to fuel their personal vendetta. Patricia sent me copies of the statements, carefully redacted but enough to connect dots. thousands of dollars labeled under vague categories like legal consultation and fence management. Sarah, my lawyer, nearly laughed when she saw them. "Oh, this is good," she said. "If they really used HOA funds to target you, that's not just unethical, it's criminal misappropriation." She wasted no time filing a complaint with the county auditor's office. And that's when things got really interesting. About a week later, a silver sedan pulled up in front of my gate. Two men in business attire stepped out, badges glinting in the sunlight. Investigators from the County Office of Housing Oversight. "Mr. Chun," one of them said, "we'd like to ask a few questions about Meadowbrook, HOA's recent activity." For a moment, I thought they were there for me. Then the taller one smiled slightly. "Don't worry, you're not under investigation. Quite the opposite. Your complaint helped open a case." He explained that multiple residents had come forward with concerns since my videos circulated. Some mentioned rising dues with no visible improvements. Others noted that Richard and Victoria refused to show financial records at meetings. The investigators asked if I'd be willing to provide my documentation, letters, videos, emails, anything showing how far the harassment had gone. I handed over everything. "I'm not trying to destroy anyone," I said. "I just want the truth out." The shorter investigator nodded. "That's usually how it starts. But for what we're seeing, you might have uncovered something much bigger than a property dispute." Meanwhile, the HOA Facebook group had turned into a battlefield. Posts once filled with outrage about the dangerous landowner now brimmed with suspicion, but against their own leadership. "Where's all the money going? We were supposed to get a new playground 2 years ago. Why does the HOA have a $4,000 charge for legal fees last quarter?" The tone had flipped completely. Victoria, once the queen bee of Meadowbrook, had gone radio silent. Richard tried to calm everyone down with a post saying, "Everything is under review. Please trust the board," but no one was buying it. By the end of the week, Patricia resigned from the board publicly. She made a post of her own, sharing what she'd found. Not the numbers, but enough detail to make it clear the leadership was hiding something. The comments exploded. Within hours, residents were demanding an emergency election. Then came a knock on my door. It was late afternoon, golden lights spilling across the porch. I opened it to find Victoria herself standing there, dressed impeccably as always, but this time her composure was cracked. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms. "About what?" She stepped closer, lowering her tone. "You need to take down that video. It's damaging reputations. It's making things worse for everyone." I held her gaze. "The only thing damaging reputations is the truth." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You think you've won? You don't understand how these things work. I've built this community. I know people in the county. I can make this very unpleasant for you." I leaned against the doorframe, calm. "You've already done that. But I'm not afraid of you anymore." For a moment, her mask slipped, pure rage flickering across her face. Then she forced a smile. "Suit yourself," she said, and walked away. I watched her go, knowing that was a desperate move. When bullies start making personal visits, it's because they're losing control. A few days later, the county investigators struck. Word spread fast. The HOA's financial accounts had been officially frozen pending an audit. The community's funds were under review, and both Richard and Victoria were suspended from their positions. Patricia called me again that night. "They found unauthorized transfers," she said. "Tens of thousands. They even paid themselves stipends." I couldn't believe it. All those months, they tried to paint me as the problem, the hostile outsider, the dangerous neighbor. Meanwhile, they've been looting their own HOA like a pair of petty tyrants in designer clothes. The irony was almost poetic, but it wasn't over yet. A week later, I came home to find a county truck parked near my property line. The driver introduced himself as an inspector. "We're here to verify the easement boundaries," he said. "Seems like there's been some misinformation." He took measurements, reviewed the plats, and shook his head. "Yep, you were right all along. The HOA never had legal access through this route. It's private property, clearly marked." He printed an official notice and handed it to me. "Keep this for your records. This should end any claims about public access." For the first time in almost a year, I felt real vindication. Not just emotionally, legally. The very foundation of their smear campaign had crumbled. The next HOA meeting was chaos. Videos of it surfaced online later, recorded secretly by residents. You could hear shouting, accusations, and Richard trying desperately to maintain order. Then someone shouted, "Where's the money, Richard?" Another voice yelled, "You said we had a surplus." The footage cut out after that, but the damage was clear. Within a week, both Richard and Victoria officially resigned from a board. A temporary committee took over, led by none other than Patricia, and one of their first acts was to issue a formal apology to me, both publicly and in writing. I still remember reading it. We acknowledged that Mr. Chun was wrongly accused and subjected to harassment by certain former members of the Meadowbrook HOA. His property rights were valid and legally upheld. We extend our apologies for the distress caused. It wasn't dramatic, but it meant everything. After months of conflict, lies, and humiliation, those few sentences felt like oxygen after being underwater too long. You'd think that was the end. But people like Victoria don't disappear quietly. About a month later, I got a tip from a local reporter. The county had officially charged her and Richard with embezzlement, falsification of records, and misuse of community funds. Apparently, the investigation found over $70,000 in unaccounted-for expenses. When a story broke in a local paper, it went viral fast, especially since my video had already made the rounds online. The same community that once whispered about the dangerous landowner now flooded my inbox with apologies and support. Even Dale stopped by again, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see it, Marcus. They really did themselves in." I smiled faintly. The truth always has a way of catching up. He chuckled. "Guess so. You handled it better than most would have." I didn't feel like a hero, just relieved. It had been a long road, one that tested my patience, my sanity, and my faith in people. But standing there on my porch, watching the sunset spill over the fields again, I realized something. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean being louder. It means being steadier. And when you've got truth and evidence on your side, even the loudest liars eventually fall silent. When the dust finally settled, I expected life to go back to normal. I thought I'd wake up one morning, feed the animals, mend a fence, and feel that sense of quiet again. That peace I used to take for granted before the HOA war consumed everything. But it wasn't that simple. Once your name's been dragged through the mud, you can't just hose it off overnight. People remember the gossip longer than the truth. Still, the silence around Meadowbrook felt different now. Less hostile, more cautious. Like the whole community was collectively exhaling after months of tension. The first week after Richard and Victoria's resignations, I started noticing small changes, cautious waves from neighbors, a nod from the mailman, even a pie left on my porch with a note. "Sorry for believing the wrong people." No signature. Didn't need one. It was the first olive branch. Then came the media. Some local journalist had picked up a story after the embezzlement charges hit. She wanted an interview, said she was doing a feature on HOA corruption and property rights abuse. At first, I said no. I didn't want to relive it. But Sarah, my lawyer, convinced me otherwise. "Tell your story, Marcus," she said. "Not for revenge, for closure. You've got proof, and you handled it with integrity. People need to see that." So I agreed. The reporter, Amanda Rios, showed up with a small camera crew and spent half a day filming on my property. She was sharp, fair, and genuinely curious. We stood by the old gate, the one that had started all of this, as I told her everything. The trespassing, the threats, the smear campaign, the lawsuit, and the eventual collapse of their little empire. Amanda listened intently, occasionally glancing at her notes. "What kept you from losing your temper?" she asked at one point. I smiled faintly. "Because they wanted me to. The moment I snapped, they'd use it against me. So I let the evidence do the talking." When a segment aired a week later, it went viral faster than I expected. Not just locally, but across the internet. The title read, "Homeowner Fights Back: How One Man Took Down a Corrupt HOA." Within days, my quiet little farming channel exploded. The video I'd originally made for documentation hit 1.2 million views. Suddenly, Strangers were leaving comments like, "You're an inspiration, man. This gives me hope. I've been fighting my HOA for years. Marcus, please start a podcast about property rights." It was surreal. I'd spent months being painted as the villain. Now I was being called a folk hero. But fame, even the accidental kind, comes with its own kind of stress. People started showing up. A couple from the next county drove by just to shake my hand. A law student emailed me asking for permission to use my case in her research paper. Then came the inevitable. Requests from YouTubers wanting interviews, podcasts, sponsorships. All wanted to ride the wave of my story. I turned most of them down. I wasn't chasing views or validation. I just wanted to live again without looking over my shoulder. Still, I couldn't deny that telling my story gave people something. Hope. For every comment trolling HOAs, there were 10 from people saying they finally understood their rights, or that they'd started recording meetings, or that they were inspired to push back against unfair treatment. That mattered to me. If my nightmare could help someone else avoid theirs, then maybe it hadn't all been for nothing. Meanwhile, Victoria and Richard's trials moved slowly through the system. Word around town was that Victoria had tried to cut a deal, claiming Richard handled the money and she was just following instructions. But the paper trail told a different story. Emails, receipts, even voice messages, all showing she authorized payments and signed off on false invoices. When a verdict finally came, it was poetic justice. Both were convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to probation, fines, and community service. No jail time, but a permanent stain on their reputations. They lost everything that gave them status, their positions, their credibility, their so-called legacy in Meadowbrook. And me? I didn't even have to lift a finger. I didn't celebrate when I heard. Just pour myself a cup of coffee and watch the morning sun filter through the barn windows, thinking about how far it had all gone. That's the thing about revenge. It's never as satisfying as you imagine. Justice, though? Justice feels quieter, heavier, but cleaner. One afternoon, a few weeks after the verdict, Patricia stopped by. She looked tired but relieved. "We finally balanced the books," she said. "Turns out the HOA has enough leftover funds to actually help people now." She smiled. "We voted to rebuild the community garden. And, well, we'd like to extend an invitation to you. You don't have to join the HOA, but we'd love your help with planning the new layout." For a second, I almost laughed. The same organization that once tried to sue me for having a fence was now asking for my help with their fences. But then I saw how sincere she looked and how far they'd come since the chaos. "All right," I said finally. "I'll help, but no tire spikes this time." She laughed. "Deal." It wasn't about forgiveness exactly. More like closure. The past didn't vanish, but at least it stopped bleeding into every day of my life. Then something unexpected happened. A law firm reached out, one that specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. They'd seen my story online and wanted to collaborate on educational videos. "People listen to you," the partner said. "You've been through it, and you explain it clearly. We could make a real difference helping homeowners understand their rights." At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a lawyer. I was just a stubborn guy who refused to be bullied off his land. But then I thought about all those messages I'd gotten. People begging for guidance. People who didn't know where to start. Maybe this was the next chapter. So I agreed. Together, we launched a video series called Know Your Ground. Each episode broke down real cases, practical advice, and stories like mine. People who stood up to corruption and won. Within 3 months, the channel had over 300,000 subscribers. Every time someone commented, "Thank you, Marcus. This saved me from getting scammed by my HOA," I felt that same sense of quiet satisfaction I used to get watching a sunrise over the pasture. Only now, the horizon was wider. One night, I was sitting on the porch again, same spot where I'd once watched HOA cars idle at the gate. The air was cool, the crickets loud, the peace almost surreal after everything that had happened. Dale walked up the driveway carrying 2 beers. "You're famous now," he joked. "Mr. Viral Landowner." I chuckled. That's one title I never asked for. He grinned. "Yeah, but you earned it. You didn't let him break you." I thought about that for a while. About all the people who'd told me to let it go, to not make waves, to just get along. But getting along only works when both sides play fair. When one side lies, manipulates, and tries to erase your rights, silence becomes surrender. And I wasn't built to surrender. That night, before heading in, I rewatched my first video. The shaky footage of me explaining the situation, calm but defiant, before anyone had believed me. It felt like watching a different person. Someone scared but trying not to show it. I smiled. "You did all right, man," I muttered to the screen. The comments kept rolling, and even now, some from people in other countries, fighting similar battles in their own ways. The internet can be a cruel place, but sometimes it connects the right people at the right time. And in a strange, unexpected way, that HOA nightmare had given me a purpose I didn't know I needed. Not just to defend my property, but to stand up and help others do the same. It's funny how peace feels heavier after a war. The kind of silence that used to mean nothing, birds chirping, the hum of the wind, the creak of a barn door, now feels sacred. Earned. For months after everything ended, I still caught myself flinching at the sound of an engine outside. My first instinct? Check the cameras. Check the fence. Check the field. Old habits die hard when your peace has been under siege. But with time, that tension faded. The camera alerts became less about paranoia and more about routine. Just another part of farm life. My land felt like mine again, the way it always should have. And the best part? Daisy, the cow that lost her calf because of Victoria's reckless joyrides, gave birth again. Healthy, strong, loud as a brass band. I named the calf Hope, because that's what the whole ordeal had given me back. Hope and fairness. Hope that truth can still matter when you refuse to let lies win. The following spring, the cornfield recovered completely. The patches Victoria's SUV had torn through sprouted even taller than before. Almost defiantly so, like nature itself had decided to reclaim what she tried to destroy. There's something poetic about that. You can crush the ground, but given time, it grows back stronger. That's kind of how I felt, too. One day, I took down the last of the no trespassing signs, not because I was giving up my right to protect my land, but because I didn't need the warnings anymore. The fence, the law, and the story had done the talking. People understood now. Even the folks from Meadowbrook who once looked down on the farmer who overreacted would nod or wave when they passed by. The hostility was gone. Respect, quiet and unspoken, had replaced it. I never saw Victoria again. After the sentencing, she disappeared. Sold her house, divorced Richard, and left town. Some said she moved back to her parents' place in another county. Others said she remarried and started over under a new name. I didn't care. For a long time, I thought I'd feel satisfaction seeing her pay for what she'd done. But when it finally happened, it wasn't joy I felt. Just exhaustion. Relief, maybe. Because the truth is, the fight changes you. Standing up for yourself sounds noble, but it costs something. Time, sleep, energy, the kind of stress that sits in your chest long after the arguments end. But if I had to do it all over again, I would. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I learned the most important truth of my life. No one will respect your boundaries until you enforce them. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local town hall about property rights. I almost declined. Public speaking isn't exactly my thing, but one of the organizers said something that stuck with me. "Marcus, people listen to your story because it's real. They need to hear it from someone who's lived it." So I went. When I stood in front of that crowd, a mix of farmers, homeowners, young couples just buying their first houses, I realized something profound. Every single person in that room had their own version of a Victoria. A neighbor who pushed too far, a boss who abused authority, a relative who crossed boundaries again and again. They didn't just come to hear about property rights. They came to hear about courage, about what happens when you stop backing down. I told them the same thing I tell everyone online. Document everything. Be patient. Don't stoop to their level. Let the truth build your case brick by brick. When I finished, people lined up just to shake my hand. Not because I was special, but because I represented something simple, proof that an ordinary person can win against power if they do it the right way. That night, driving home under the stars, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd finally closed a door that had been stuck open for too long. A few weeks later, I got a letter. It wasn't from a lawyer or the county. It was from a teenager named Elena who lived 2 towns over. She wrote, "My family's been fighting our HOA for months. They've been bullying us because my dad built a wheelchair ramp for my little brother without permission. We were going to give up, but then I showed my dad your videos. You gave him the courage to fight back the right way. Thank you for showing us that we're not alone." I sat there for a long time holding that letter. It's one thing to win your own battle. It's another to realize your story helps someone else win theirs. That's when I knew my channel, my experience, all of it, had turned into something bigger than me. So I kept making videos. Not drama, not rants, just honest, educational, sometimes funny stories about real people taking back their peace. The channel grew, but I kept it grounded. No sponsors, no clickbait, just truth. Because the truth had been my weapon all along. Sometimes people ask if I regret using those spike strips. Here's my answer. No, not for a second. I used them responsibly, with warnings, documentation, and law enforcement notice. They weren't traps, they were boundaries made visible. The irony is, they never hurt anyone. They just forced someone to finally face the consequences of ignoring limits. And that's the thing about boundaries. When people keep crossing them, they eventually trip on their own arrogance. Victoria's downfall wasn't because of the spike strips. It was because of her entitlement. They just happened to be the thing that stopped her long enough for accountability to catch up. Life now is quieter, simpler, and maybe even better than before. Every morning, I walk the fence line with my coffee, checking gates, watching the sunlight spill over the fields. The cows graze peacefully. The air smells of hay and clean soil. No engines, no shouting, no lawsuits, just peace. Dale still visits a few times a week. We sit on the porch, drink beer, and watch the sunset. Sometimes he jokes, "You think karma's got spike strips too?" And I always laugh. Maybe, but if it does, I hope it uses them wisely. One evening, as I was putting tools away in the barn, I caught sight of the box where I'd stored the spike strips. They sat there quietly, collecting dust. A reminder of everything that had happened, and everything that didn't need to happen again. I didn't throw them away, not out of bitterness, but respect, because they represented something bigger now. Not just defense, but discipline, the will to stand your ground without becoming the villain in your own story. So, if you're watching this or reading this, and you're dealing with your own Victoria, remember this. You don't need to shout. You don't need to fight dirty. You just need to know your rights, stay calm, and document everything. Let the evidence speak louder than emotion. Let patience be your power. And when the storm finally passes, when the noise fades and the truth stands tall, you'll find peace waiting for you on the other side. Not because someone gave it to you, but because you earned it. That's what home means to me now. Not just a place, not just land, but peace that no one can trespass on again. The kind that comes when you stop being afraid to defend what's yours and start believing that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, always pays off in the end. I took one last look at the fence that gleamed under the fading sun, took a deep breath, and smiled. After everything, I was home again. And this time, I knew it would stay that way.